Hi there. This tutorial is a great project for those wanting to start out in basket weaving or those who want to try something that's achievable in a weekend. This is a 2-hour basket or less, so depending on how fast you weave and how fast you follow along with the instructions, you should be able to finish this basket in about 2 hours. The tools I'm using are specifically for basket weaving, but as I show you what tools I'm using, I'll give you suggestions of tools you can use from things that you probably have around your house. And the reed that I'm using is going to be fairly basic. I tried to keep it down to a minimum a number of different types of reed so that it's very accessible. So you can find links in the description below for all the tools and materials. The materials you'll need for this basket are 1/2 inch flat reed, 5/8 inch flat oval, one side's rounded and the other side's flat, and some seagrass. I have a bin of water for soaking the rim, and that's on a towel. I have my area laid out on a towel so that it soaks up any excess water. A spray bottle for keeping things damp. My reed cutters, these are a short bladed pair of scissors. The short blade makes it easier to cut the reed. It gives you more leverage on the reed. You can also use kitchen shears or craft scissors, something like that, something that is sharp enough to cut through the reed. A box knife. You can use an X-Acto knife or box knives are pretty basic tools. A spoke weight, this is to hold the stakes down, and I have used a hammer instead of a spoke weight to hold things down. It doesn't work quite as well because the hammer isn't flat, but it doesn't work quite as well as a spoke weight, but it's a good alternative. A number of metal 2-inch clamps and some plastic 2-inch clamps. I like having both of these because the plastic ones have a space that I can fit the rim in between when doing the rim, and then these ones are nice and hefty for holding the reed pieces together. You want a measuring tape, a straight tipped awl, and a pencil. This basket is specifically designed to fit the IKEA pack of larger size napkins. You can use this design to fit pretty much any napkin size. You could just change the dimension of the base and how many stakes you use, change it out to make smaller or larger baskets, and change the length of the stakes to make shorter or taller baskets. Okay, so this basket, we're going to make a closed base basket, and if you want more details on the closed base basket, you can watch this video up here where I go over that, but we'll go over most of the process here. We're going to cut 18 stakes that are 23 inches long, and then 8 stakes that are 14 inches long in order to create that closed base. So using your measuring tape, you're going to take a piece of reed, and every bundle of reed has thinner pieces that are a little bit more flexible, more flimsy, and then pieces that just have a little bit more heft to them. So I'm gonna go through my bundle here and pull from the middle, looking for a piece. This piece is has a little sturdier. It's not as flimsy. You can see this piece is really flimsy and this piece has more steadiness to it. So I'm gonna pull this piece out for my stakes. Having sturdier pieces for stakes mean your basket walls will be stronger. Once you find the end of your piece, we're gonna cut those 18 stakes. So line up the end of your measuring tape with the end of the reed and measure out 23 inches. Hold that in place and then cut your stakes. So you have a 23-inch stake. So set this aside. We're gonna mark the centers next. Cut 18 of these. Once you have your 18 stakes at 23 inches and your 8 stakes at 14 inches, go ahead and mark the center by laying them out in front of you and then marking the center using your measuring tape. Now, reed pieces have a right and a wrong side, and the right side is smooth, and you can't tell as many hairs on the surface when you run your hand along, and then one side is rougher when you run your hand along it. So that wrong side, that's the side or the rough side, that's the side that you wanna put your mark on. So lay out your measuring tape, and we have 23 inches here. So we're gonna do 11.5 inches is where our mark's going to be, and this is where your pencil comes in handy. So marking each of the 18-inch stakes at 11.5 inches, and each of the 8-inch stakes, the 14-inch stakes at 7 inches. And again, making sure to feel each of the stakes. The marks are going to be facing up as we work, and the wrong side will be inside the basket. So the outside of the basket will be nice and smooth, and the inside will have the rough edges. And as you mark, you can go ahead and stick your steaks in the bin of water, as we're going to be using them right away. You don't want them to soak in the water for too long enough that they become pliable enough to work with. When your steaks have rested in the water for about a minute, you can pull them out. And I just have the 18-inch long steaks in there. As soon as I pull these out, you can put in your shorter 14-inch steaks and let those soak as you set up the base. So set aside your steaks so that they're in easy reach, but away from your work surface, so that you can work in front of yourself. And then we're going to start laying the steaks out in front, lining up the center marks so that they're lined up here in the center, and line them up right next to each other, leaving about a 1/2 inch steak width in between, because we'll lay the shorter steaks in between there. And I'm going to be laying out 9 steaks in this direction, and then we'll do 9 steaks in the other direction. And this is where you use your spoke weight. You set it on your steaks to hold them in place, so you have free hands to be able to maneuver the rest of them. And you can slide these under like so, and go until you have 9 laid out. For this basket, for the larger dimension of napkin, we're going to create a base of 9 inches. Okay, now when you have all of your steaks, I have 9 steaks here laid in one direction, parallel in front of you, then you're going to grab your other set of small steaks, the 14-inch length, and again, with the center mark facing up, place one of these small steaks in between each of these 18-inch long steaks. Just slide them under your spoke weight, matching up that center mark yet again. Okay, and then let's check how wide this space is here, because again, we want to do that base 9 inches. Wow, so we're a lot bigger. We're gonna move these closer together. Okay, so we're gonna shoot as close to 9 inches as we can. A little bit over is probably fine, because you'll have extra room to reach in and grab your napkins. This pattern is about 1 inch bigger than the napkin width, so you'll have about 1 inch of extra space in your basket. You can add space, you can have less space, just depending on how big you create your base. Okay, so now we're going to take one of the other steaks from the other pile, and we're going to weave down that center line, and then we'll work out from there. So matching up all of these center points, we're going to weave right over top of them. And that's going to be in an over, under pattern with the center mark on this new steak facing up. So I'm going to lift up this first steak and then go over the second steak and under. So basically going over all of the short steaks and under all of the long steaks for this first new weaver or new steak. And I'll pull it through to the center, matching it up with the middle right here. Okay, because we're using a odd number of steaks, you're going to have that center mark in the center of the 8.5 steak. So count 8 in, and then the next one, or halfway in the middle of that steak. And then you can center all of these steaks onto that center, that new center steak. Okay, and then grab another steak, and we're going to weave this opposite of this first one. So you can see I did over, under, over, under, over, under for these steaks. Now I'm going to go opposite by going over this steak, under this steak. So under all of the shorter steaks. And then we'll pull it again to that center steak, which I think is this one right here. Yep, so we'll line that up right there in the middle and then press it in against, and we want about 1/2 inch of space in between the two steaks here. And then press these in together so that they're nice and tight. And we'll do the final adjustment once we've gotten all the steaks in. It's just good to check it as you go. Okay, another steak. Again, center mark facing up, and we'll do the opposite of what we did before. Okay, so push it in, and this can be tricky. You might have to get in there and pull with your fingers, pull tight. As it tightens up and the different reeds start to clench together, it'll get a little bit tougher to move things around. A closed base is a good technique to use when you're going to use your basket for small objects. For the napkin basket, you don't necessarily need to use the closed base technique, but it's a good technique to know. So another way to do this would be to start here and thread it under like this. I just find placing it on top and then pulling the stakes out of the way and over top makes it easier to handle, like so. And then you can lift them up to get closer, like that. Okay, so now we have our last stake for this side. We're going to put this in place and then flip to the other side of that center stake. Place your stake weight onto the other side, and now we're gonna work on this opposite side. And if you begin to feel that your reed is becoming dry and not as wet and pliable, give it a spray down with your spray bottle. You wanna keep everything very damp at this stage because we're going to be bending it and manipulating it to create the walls of the basket, and you don't want it to crack at this point. Now when you have all your pieces pressed in, we'll do a quick measurement and we'll measure this way, and we have a nice 9 inches this way. And you want to measure in the middle and on both sides to make sure that it's nice and square. So I'll measure out here. I need to press these rows in a little bit. So you'll just pull them towards the center. That's better. And then out here, that looks good. Then center, that looks good. And then we'll measure in this direction, and I pulled really tight. So we have an inch wiggle room. So I'll pull this one out a 1/2 inch, putting that inch on either side. So I'll put the center mark at 4.5 because that is 1/2 of 9. And then I'll pull this stake out, and then we'll adjust those out that direction. And then I'm going to adjust this one so that it's at 9 as well. So we have 9 there. And then up here, bring that over. Got 9 there. Okay, that looks good. So then what you do if you have some odd movement that's going on, you reach in and you begin to move your stakes apart so that they're evenly spaced. I'm eyeballing the evenly, but move things around until there's equal distance between each stake. Okay, and that looks pretty good. Do a little bit more movement here, like so. Okay, and then over here, I'll push this out a bit. This one. When you think you have it all laid out, check it one more time just to make sure that you're nice and square on the outsides and then the insides, because the reed does bow, and so it can be different at different points in the square. Okay, so there is my 9-inch square. And now I'm going to lift up my stake weight and rotate this around so that I can do the crow's feet. Now, crow's feet is the next step in the closed base basket, where you are folding over the short stakes and we're splitting them in half and tucking them in. So first, you're going to want to get everything really wet right along this last stake where the small stakes are poking out. So I'm getting it damp first. And then I'm gonna go in with my straight tip packer and press a groove or score right along this stake right here, creating kind of a crease in these short stakes. So right along the edge of that last stake. Just creating a basically creating a nice fold line at which to fold these steaks over. Tuck that back in and then do the other side. Okay, and then go in and fold the steaks right along the edge of this last steak. So you're folding the short steaks over, creating a crease, folding them all the way over, and being gentle not to crack them off. They will start to splinter and crack if they're too brittle or if they're not wet enough. So make sure that if it begins to crack, you get it wet again, let it get damp, and then slowly bend it and fold it over so that it doesn't crack off. Now go in and we're going to cut off these lengths at the outside or the inside edge, I guess, of this second steak. So we have this first steak here and the second steak here. We're gonna go onto this outer edge. We're going to trim this short steak to that outer edge. And what we'll be doing then is trimming this in half, this short steak in half, up until we meet this outer edge right here, and then tucking one end on either side of itself. So folding it over and then tucking it in on either side of itself, like so. Another term for this is chicken feet, crow's feet. There's probably other terms for it. It's just a nice way of finishing off steaks that you use as fillers for a closed-base basket. We will continue trimming these lengths of the shorter reed down so that they're trimmed off at that second steak, and then cutting them in half here, all the way down and on the other side as well, creating the little V's in between each steak. So you'll have two pieces coming under each of these, or in between each of these steaks. So it'll end up looking like this all the way across with two overlapping on each side. When you've finished doing the crow's feet or chicken feet or whatever you want to call them in the edges, then spray down the edges of your basket once again, because we'll be folding the steaks up this time. It's called upsetting the steaks, and we want them to be nice and pliable and damp. So just like we did with the shorter pieces, we're going to go around and do a quick score right along the edge of this steak where we'll be folding it. So I'm scoring the edge, and scoring is just pressing a fold line into the steak. And you can rotate your basket. Now that it's all these steaks are folded in, it's pretty steady, pretty easy to rotate around. So you can go in, and I'm estimating where the fold line will be because these are all on top. So I don't have a line to actually, like this one, I can tell exactly where the line needs to be because the steak edge is there. This one I'm having to estimate based on where it is underneath. So I'm not pressing too hard, just hard enough that I can create a visible crease in the reed. Okay, and then go around and fold these steaks over and up onto themselves, making sure to be gentle, because if they crack, you'll have to cut a new steak and thread it back in if they crack off. If they crack a little bit, like this one's cracking just a little bit, that's okay. You just don't want it to crack so much that it breaks off or cracks halfway through and then the steak is weak. Once all of your steaks are upset, and they're upset so that you can start to create the walls of your basket, it helps to create a nice crease so that you can create that nice 90-degree angle at the base. Then you're ready to start weaving the walls. Grab a piece of your 1/2-inch flat reed and throw it in your bin of water. I'm gonna twine this up, throw it in my bin of water to prepare. And we'll do the first row starting on the side that doesn't have the crow's feet. So place that side facing you, against you. Then you'll want 4 of your metal clamps. You can grab your 1/2-inch flat reed out and tap off that extra water. And again, we're going to check for the right and the wrong side of the reed, working with the right side, the smooth side, to the outside of the basket. So now it'll be facing outside. So now we're going to work an under-over weave, and we start by placing this on top of a steak and clamping it in place. And you want to work on a steak that has at least 4 other stakes next to it, because we'll come around the basket and then overlap stakes so that we can overlap the weaver and hide it behind a stake. So we start on top and we're gonna weave under and over and under and over and under and over. And then to create a nice corner, I'm gonna fold these all up and crease my corner right along this last stake, and then turn. And when you turn, you wanna make sure that you're continuing that pattern of under over. So we're over this one, we wanna go under this next stake. And this is where you're creating that first row of corners. So it's really important to pull in tight enough so that you get this nice 90-degree angle here. Go under and then over and under, over, under, over, under, over, under. And then here again, crease your reed and then go over and under. And if your reed starts to lift up like this is why I have had you grab 4 clamps. You can go in and put a clamp right in the middle here. Hold that in place and then continue weaving. And the tension is important when you're weaving your rows, because how hard you pull will determine how tight the corner gets and also the shape of your basket. So if you're pulling really hard as you're weaving, the walls of your basket will start to curve in. If you're really loose, they'll fall out or be curved out. So having a nice tension so we get this first row so that the stakes are standing straight up and down will mean that the next row we can continue to build that nice straight wall. Okay, and then I'm gonna first put in a clamp here to hold this in place. Flip it around. And then I'm gonna fold here to make that crease and turn the corner. And in order to, well, first I'm going to put a clamp here because this is going everywhere. This just holds you, the clamps hold your work in place so that it's easier to handle. I only have 2 hands and I want them both handy for weaving, and so putting the clamps here on each of the sides just make sure that I know what's going on in each of these sides because it's held in place. So to go around this corner here, I'm going to move this clamp over. So I'm maintaining where that spot where I started. I'm just gonna move this over to hold the reed in place, the weaver in place as I weave, or so that I can weave over. So I'm gonna overlap where we started out and go behind this next stake. So there's 2 overlapping, and then go over this stake and cut to the outside edge of the 4th stake and tuck this behind. So you can see it's overlapping where we started here and hiding behind this 4th stake. So we have a nice finish where you can't see where we started and stopped. Quarter turn, so go to the next side over from where that first row where we started. Lift out that clamp. Again, check to see which is the right side, have that facing up. And we're going to start our weaver here, clamp it in place, and then weave opposite of what we did first. So where we were under here, we're gonna go over and then under and then over, under, over, under, and then again, creating our corner crease. You create that corner crease to ensure that you get a nice square corner. And typically I do a corner crease for the first couple of rows in order to create the shape of basket, to follow the base of the basket shape. As I weave up the walls, the shape begins to round at the top. You can continue to form angular corners by creating these creases here, and then when you get to the end of the basket, just continue to crease your corners and the rim and allow it to dry pressed against something flat like a ruler or something so that it holds those tight corners in place. Naturally, reed wants to go into the round, and so usually when I weave, I just allow the top of my basket end up as a round. You can fold it into tight corners if you want it to. And once you get 2 or 3 rows in place, you will probably be able to stop using the clamps to hold things in place because the walls will begin to hold themselves up. The reed you're working with will just naturally be contained in the wall. And as you work, press your rows down. You want everything packed together nice and tight because it shrinks as it dries, and so you want all your rows tight together. Okay, coming around this corner, I'm gonna overlap here, go under this second one, over the third one, and cut to the outside edge of the fourth one and tuck under that 4th stake. So then again, my row is hidden in the overlap. And then rotate a 1/4 turn, and we're gonna start on the 3rd row. And this one, I'm going to not use clamps as I work around here. Pressing down as I do the weaving to make sure that the walls are pressed down tightly together. Okay, and this is a good point to show you. I've run out of reed before I finish this row, and so I want to show you how to splice a new piece of reed in as you're weaving. So grab a new piece of flat reed and put it in your bin of water and let that soak. And now we're going to trim this one back to where it's on top and to the outside edge of one of these stakes. You don't want to trim it at a corner because that will add extra bulk to your corner. You want to trim it somewhere inside the wall. So I have it here. We're going to overlap just like we did when we overlap at the end. We're going to overlap back 4 stakes. So tapping off your reed and finding the smooth side to work as your right side. And then slide it under so it's doing exactly what your last reed was doing, your last piece, because you're still doing the same over under pattern in the same sequence, same row. So we overlapped and tucked under this stake like so, overlapped here, went over under this stake and over this raw end, and then we'll continue weaving just like we were doing. And if you come to the corner and your stakes are beginning to turn in like this, make sure to straighten them out so that you have nice straight walls and straight corners. So keep weaving the walls. We're going to do about 4 more rows of the 1/2 inch flat reed before we stop to complete the rim. If you enjoy weaving baskets and you want to see more videos like this, give this video a thumbs up because it'll help support this channel and help me produce more and better videos. And there you have the walls, all as far as we're gonna go up. So this extra space, we're going to do a cut and tuck technique. And that is where we're going to fold over. So all of the stakes that are over top, we're gonna fold those over. And the stakes behind, we're gonna trim those down right to the top edge of that last weaver. So go around and fold over those that are over top and cut off those that are behind. And it's important to make sure you don't cut off the ones on the outside because these are what hold the basket together. We'll tuck these around and tuck them into the inside of the basket. And if you cut those off, then we don't have anything to hold the basket pieces together to hold the weavers down. So when we put the rim on, it would just pull the rim off if we didn't have these folded over pieces. Okay, and then go around and fold over all of these so that they're flush with that top edge of this last weaver. And my reed is really pliable, so I'm working quickly. If your reed isn't soft and pliable and it's starting to crack as you're folding it, be gentle or get it wet again before folding it because you don't want them to crack off. Okay, and then trim down to the length so that you will have something to tuck it behind. So you'll take your packer, lift up the weaver the next row down, so the next weaver that's on top, and we're going to fold these over and tuck them behind that weaver inside the basket. So go in and trim those down so that they'll be tucked behind that weaver and won't show out the bottom side of it. So I've trimmed down, you can see these, I've trimmed down so that they're just above that bottom edge of that weaver. And then we'll move this weaver away from the stake, fold this under and tuck it behind so that it's hidden like so. And then you can go from the outside and tuck them in so that they don't show from the outside as well. So go ahead and do that all the way around the basket, folding them down, trimming them down to the length, and then tucking them behind that row. Now we're ready to add the rim to the top of the basket. So put your rim reed in the water and allow it to soak for 2 to 3 minutes so that it becomes really pliable. It's a thick reed, so you want it to soak for quite a while. You are also going to want your 1/4 inch wide flat oval reed, so add that to your water bucket. The first thing you're going to do when you have your rim reed soaked and ready to go is estimate the length and cut it down so that it's a little bit shorter and easier to deal with. Wrap the rim reed around the top of the basket and then overlap it 2 inches and cut at about 2 inches. So this will be your outer reed, and then do the same thing a second time for the inner reed, but we're gonna measure it from the outside. Okay, so setting one of these aside for the inner reed, you're going to take the outer rim reed and your box knife and trim down 1.5 inches length of the reed down to about a flat reed thickness, because we're going to overlap the two and we want it to be the least amount bulky as possible without totally cutting away the reed. Pull your basket in and your plastic clamps, and we're going to clamp this to the outside edge of one side of the basket, right on top of this top row of weaving. So clamp it there and then bring it around through your hands and put a clamp on each side, making sure you're pressing the reed tight against the wall of the basket. Like so. And then where it overlaps, you want to overlap that part where it's trimmed down, cut your rim reed, and then trim down the end so that you have cut the corners, and then I like to cut the corners again so that I have a rounded rim here, or a rounded end there. And then overlap and bring the clamp around and place on top of both layers, like so. And then we'll do the same thing for the inner rim. Bringing the inner rim over, trimming down 1.5 inches. And then placing on the opposite wall from where you put the outer rim. So this outer rim's here, we'll put the inner rim on this side. And this will be a little bit tricky. It does help if because you want the rounded side inside the basket, if you curve the reed in the opposite way, in the way you'll be putting it in the basket, because it doesn't naturally want to curve that direction. So training it a bit before you put it in is helpful. Okay, so lift this clamp up and put it on top, and then press this up against the wall and around the inside rim here. And then when you come to that overlap, trim it right where you stopped trimming down that reed so that it overlaps without causing bulk. And then again, trim those corners like so, and put the clamp there. And then grab your seagrass, and we're going to place the seagrass into this space between the two rim reeds. So I'm gonna tuck it under this clamp here to hold it in place. Pull my end in place and then thread it around the top of the basket, like so. Carefully lift your clamp so you don't lose your rim placement. And keep going until you reach where you started, and leave a little bit of a tail, a little bit of excess, because if you get to the end and you find out you didn't cut quite enough or you didn't measure it out quite long enough, you'll have a little bit of excess. It's easier to cut off extra than it is to add extra. Okay, and then we're ready to lash the rim. So tap off your lashing reed, and then we're going to grab one end of it and drop the rest to the floor. And you want the rounded side of this flat oval reed facing up. And this is a little bit smaller than a 1/4 inch wide, but you can use a 1/4 inch wide. And I'm going to start on a side that doesn't have the joins for the rim. I'm going to start right here between 2 stakes. So I have a stake here and a stake here. I'm going to slide this in between the basket and the inner rim, slide it in that space, and then bring it up and around and back in. So I'm creating a loop knot situation so that it's held tightly against that rim. So it's looped around and held inside. Now to measure out the length of the lashing that you want to go around the basket 3 times. So once, twice, 3 times, and cut so that it's 3 times around, and you can get rid of the excess. This helps keep down some of the bulk so you're not threading through more than you need to. Okay, and then thread the lashing through your hand so that your thumb is holding the rounded side facing up. You want to keep that orientation so that it doesn't get twisted as you thread it through. And then we started between these 2 stakes, so these 2 stakes here. So we're going to put our packer between that top row and the second row. And that's where we're going to place the lashing. So create a space with your packer and then slide this through and pull all the way through. So you're looping around the 2 rims and the piece of seagrass and the basket. And then pull tight. Not so tight that you break your lashing, that would be a bummer, but tight enough that you hold all those layers together, sandwich them all together so that they're nice and tight and it won't crack or get caught. The lashing won't get caught on something once it's dry. Again, the reeds do begin to shrink as they dry, and so pulling tight is key to make sure that as they shrink, it doesn't create extra space or looseness. So into that space, pull through and pull tight. And I'll come to the outside here and help this pull tight by pinching the pieces together and pulling on this reed with this hand. And then I pinch the basket, the lashing in place with this hand so that it doesn't move right here, so that I'm pinching it on this back side here. That way it doesn't move around, and then I can use these 2 hands or these fingers to thread it through my hand to maintain that orientation. Okay, slide the reed through. So we're creating a whip stitch around the rim, and we're going to do this all the way around this basket. So it'll look like this all the way around the basket. When you come to the place where your rims are overlapping, you'll want to try to catch that overlap in one of your loops of lashing in order to hold it tight in place and so that the end doesn't hang out loose. Leave your clamp in place as long as you can while it's not in the way so that it acts as an extra hand for you. So we're going to loop this around, and now I'll move this guy just over a bit so that it's out of my way. Keep that tight, and we'll loop around those ends. Okay, when you get back to where you started, so right here, I began this loop and I'm ending here. I have one more space. I'm going to do a loop in that space or the lashing in that space. So go through there, pull through, and pull tight. And then I'll trim this down to about 5 inches and use your straight tip packer, place it in between the inner rim and the basket, just like we did at the beginning, and you'll loop this around and place it between those and down into the basket and pull down and tight. And there is your finishing knot. So now we'll trim down these tails in here, and there is your finished basket. There are a few finishing steps, one of which is to go over the basket and make sure all of your stakes that you tucked are pressed behind so that they're hidden. So if there's anything sticking out like right here, you can press those behind. The next thing is to go over it, and if there are a lot of hairs on the outside of your basket, you can trim those down. So anywhere where there is some hairs sticking off of the reed, this reed is made up of fibers that are connected, and sometimes those fibers come loose and you end up with what looks like a hairy finish on your basket. So you can go in and trim those down. The next thing you can do is to allow this basket to dry overnight. The rim is fairly thick, it has multiple layers, and so you want to make sure that it has plenty of time to dry. So just air dry it, allow it to naturally dry. Don't stick it in front of a heater or a fan, because that can abnormally dry out the reed and it will become brittle and not last as long. So allow it to naturally dry for 24 to 48 hours, depending on how humid your area is. You want it to completely dry. And then I suggest signing and dating the bottom with your name and the date, so that you can look back in the future and see that how your basket weaving has improved, or if you give it as a gift, it's fun for them to find your name on the bottom and the date that you created it. Finally, I suggest sealing your basket or staining it, and you can check out this video here where I go over both sealing and staining on your hand-woven baskets. And I suggest doing that because if you don't, and you live in a humid area or leave your basket somewhere where they're damp, then they can start to accumulate dirt and mold. And I have a post in the description below all about me finding mold on my baskets and how to clean them off with soap and water. But in order to not have to clean them off consistently, I suggest sealing it with a clear sealer or staining it with some sort of wood stain. You can find some suggestions in the description below, and that will keep it sealed and keep the reed from building up your oils from your hands or from your environment, dirt and mold as well. So here's the finished napkin basket. We'll put our napkins in there and it's ready to go. You can set this on your table or kitchen counter. Obviously this doesn't only have to be a napkin basket. It would be a great bread basket, roll basket, kitchen counter, catch-all basket, or work in the bathroom, pretty much anywhere. I'd love to hear how you use your basket. Leave a comment below. Be sure to check the description for all of the materials, tools, lots of notes, and you can sign up for my email update list on textileindy.com. The link's in the description below to sign up for that. I send out updates on this channel and my website, tutorials, share lots of fun resources in all of these different categories, and I'd love for you to join the textile community. So thanks for watching, and I hope to catch you next time. Happy weaving!